Hi guys, I'm here today with my book review of The Dog Runner by Bren MacDibble. This is a book that actually publishes today, May 2nd, so congrats Bren on the release and well done on such a great book. This is honestly a really charming, really great, fun as in to read, not so much in terms of the actual content, in terms of what it's about. It's quite hard-hitting in that sense, but it's a really fun read, really valuable and really sort of hard-hitting as well. I really enjoyed this book. I'm so excited to talk about it, and really I think if you are interested in sort of young adult or sort of higher end middle grade fiction or children's fiction, this is definitely a book that you should pick up because it's absolutely great. What I'll do first is just quickly read out the blurb, because I know that's what a lot of people read first to obviously introduce yourself to a book if you're thinking about picking it up. And then I'll dive straight into the story, the characters, a little bit about sort of my feelings on everything, and then I'll give sort of an overall sort of summary of my thoughts at the end. So for the blurb, it is: Ella and her brother, Emery, are alone in a city that's starving to death. If they are going to survive, they must get away up country to find Emery's mum. But how can two kids travel such big distances across a dry, barren and dangerous landscape? From the author of How to Be, an intense and thrilling adventure with an important environmental message set in an all too possible dystopian future Australia. So this is actually a book entirely about Ella and Emery's journey across sort of the barren landscape of this future dystopian Australian sort of terrain. So they start off in a city where people are fighting each other. It's a really desperate situation. The food packages from the government have stopped coming. A fungus has completely wiped out a lot of plant life, a lot of food sources. It's basically this really dark, desperate situation where people are fighting each other for food. They're fighting each other for sort of resources that they can trade with other people to get food. And it's basically this really horrible situation where you just don't know when your next meal is coming. They're just struggling to find their parents. They want to get away from the city and get to sort of the countryside where there's still hope of grass and plants and land and food. And it's basically following them as they go from the city all the way out to where Emery's mum lives. They go along and they have to do so much that's really difficult to imagine young kids doing. So, you know, they're struggling to survive, they're having to kill wild animals to eat and feed their dogs. The book's called The Dog Runner. One thing that's really important and really great about this is that there's an entire pack of dogs that these kids are travelling with. They actually travel on a cart. I'm not sure if you can see on the front of the book cover here, but it's like a trike kind of cart type thing where the dogs are pulling it as like a sleigh type thing. So those dogs are literally their ticket out of there. They're pulling them constantly towards their destination, and these dogs are so important to them. They're like family to them. There's an entire sort of backstory to how important and integral these dogs are. And it's really beautiful actually to read about that close relationship between a human and a dog that's obviously been around for centuries. It's not something that is in a lot of books. I think in a lot of books you do get animals and you do obviously get the relationships with them, but in this it feels a lot more sort of important and a lot more integral because of how sort of important these dogs are even to their own survival. And some pretty harrowing things happen, like when they are killing these like wild roos and wild snakes even just to feed the dogs and, you know, keep alive and stay sort of alive. It is really harrowing, and you read about it and you think, how are these kids doing that? It's really surreal to read and think in that kind of desperate situation where there is no food, where there is no dairy products or bread or even the simplest things like rice or grains. They're literally killing these starving animals just to feed themselves, and it's like a, you know, a really desperate situation, and it's really impactful. I think that's one of the things that this book does really well, is sort of the message of desperation, how, you know, people have to sort of band together, or in this case actually they end up fighting each other. Obviously there's a lot of desperation for food and you've just got to fight and, you know, do what you can to survive. It's a lot of stories about survival in this, not just of the two central kids that you follow, but of everybody. So the kind of family dynamic that we've got here is quite varied. That was one thing that I did pick up on straight away. So Ella and her dad live in the city, and Emery's his son as well. But then he's got a different mum to Ella, so that's already a dynamic that sometimes you don't see in fiction, where there's two sets of parents and obviously siblings with one parent shared, that kind of thing. So that was really interesting to sort of read about their dynamic. By the end of the book, the entire family comes together, and it just really is powerful to see sort of the changes that have happened across that. In terms of the story of the book, it is actually quite simple. I think that was one of the things that really surprised me, that by the end of it, it was just about a journey. I thought there was going to be a little bit more to it, and sometimes I felt like maybe there could have been more to it, but it was still really moving, and I still really enjoyed it. It's really hard-hitting. I'd say the story itself is definitely one that really hits home. It's really realistic as well. It's as if, you know, this could happen at any time. It's not something that, you know, is kind of unrealistic in the sense of some potential dystopias where aliens come or something like that and ruin the planet. It's like, it's something that could realistically happen. This book really does make you think about human existence and how much it could change in, you know, just a few months if something like that were to happen and just completely wipe out the land. Definitely a serious book to consider, even for kids. Like, I think the best thing about the book, or perhaps one of the best things, is how readable it is for kids as well. So you have those environmental issues, you have those concerns about food and sort of desperation and desperate situations. All of that is packed into this book, but it's in such a readable format for young people that it is really great. Like, I'm 22, but someone of like 12 years of age could read this and still draw out some really powerful messages and themes about taking care of the environment and, you know, helping others and being caring and food disappearing. In terms of the main characters, I obviously really loved the dogs. I'm a huge dog fan, so having the pack of dogs in there was great. I loved reading about their behaviours, sort of their interactions with people, their interactions with each other, sort of their behaviour was really realistic, and I did really get a feel for their sort of ferocity and wildness at the same time as their domesticity and sort of their love for the kids and the family. So I did really appreciate them. And the kids as well, so Emery and Ella, both of them are really well developed. I really did connect with each of them on a different level. So with Emery, I did at the start find him quite irritating. I thought he had a bit of an ego. He was really kind of irritating, and, you know, his treatment of Ella at points and sort of the family itself was a little bit questionable. For instance, when he's like, oh, well, Ella's mum's not my mum, and you just think, yeah, but you don't need to say that. But then it develops further as the book goes on, and it actually makes more sense as to why he feels that way. So I really did grow to like him a lot more, especially after sort of the latter half of the book, where the sort of journey ramps up a lot and he has to deal with several things happening to him that he wouldn't have liked. So not to spoil anything, it's not really a huge spoiler, but he does get injured as part of the journey, and having to deal with that, him having to actually deal with people having to help him when he wants to be a really independent person, is really powerful, because I think it does strike home when you have someone that is like that, who always wants to be, you know, independent, and they don't want to rely on someone, but then they have to. It made him a lot more likeable when he actually realised that he can ask for help, that he doesn't have to be on his own. And then he did obviously support Ella the entire way through. He's trying to protect her, he's always trying to help her, and that was really good as well. I think, like, that big brother sort of feel was really there all the time, and that was really nice. And then with Ella herself, she's also a really sort of gripping character. She kind of was the flip side, so towards the beginning as well, she was quite likeable, and then she did have a little bit of a period where I found her a little bit sort of frustrating in the sense of, you know, she didn't really do much. But then I had to realise that she is young. Like, I think she's 10, or maybe possibly a little bit younger, but her story, to read about her doing so much later in the book, actually shows how much progression someone in that situation can make. Even a young child can go from being sort of naive and weak and not knowing what to do, to then having to just know what to do, having to work it out, having to just put that effort in. And I think her growing as a person and, you know, having to do things she wasn't comfortable with just to help the two of them survive, and the dogs survive as well, obviously, it was really impactful. And I did think that it was really enjoyable to read her journey as well, because by the end of it, even her parents, they do actually acknowledge the fact that she's grown, she's changed as a person. She's not the same girl that they left behind at the beginning of the book. And I think that's really good as well, how there is an arc, there is a development throughout the book, not only in terms of the story, but in terms of the characters themselves becoming different people as a result of their situation. That was just really great, and I really enjoyed reading that. In terms of the presentation of the book, the cover itself, I absolutely adore it. I really love like the outline of the dogs, I really love sort of the format, and it also has just here, I'm not sure if you can see it very well with the sun, but it has the pack of 5 dogs leading the bike, so the actual way that they travel across the land is on this trike led by the dogs, like a sleigh almost. And then even throughout the book, I'm not sure if this is going to be in the regular copies, I think and hope so that it will be, but they have really cute little sort of graphics, so they have little paw prints on the titles, and then they often have the little dog outlines sort of at the end of each chapter if it'll fit. And I thought that was a really nice touch to give it some sort of visual difference. It makes the book really sort of nice to look at, and the text size as well is really good. I think that made it really readable. The space between the lines meant that I could easily just flip through the pages. I didn't ever have any times where I felt like I couldn't keep reading because it wasn't readable. Everything just flowed really well, and I really enjoyed sort of the presentation of the book as well. If there's one thing I do want to comment on, it's actually the written style. So Bren MacDibble's style is very different to some other books that I have read. So with other books, I think you do get that quite proper language where people will use, you know, full sentences, full words, all that kind of thing. But then in this book, there is actually a lot of colloquialisms and sort of small things that appeal to the sort of target audience, not only just sort of children, but also Australian sort of readers as well, who obviously will understand that kind of local appeal. So even things just like, instead of saying because, like they have cos, C-O-Z, and just that kind of thing makes it really sort of down to earth and really more appealing, I feel, to kids, and I think that's really valuable. For me, it did strike me as a little bit weird. It took me a little bit of time to get used to, but it was really enjoyable after a while, and I did think more books should take that into consideration. Not always using the full sentences, the proper language, not always sort of going that far, but actually bringing it down to a level that suits the sort of characters and suits the audience. With this, it is a first-person perspective, so Ella is the primary protagonist, so you follow her directly and it's always from her perspective. So hearing her talk and having the writing sort of reflect how she talks was really important, and I think that was really good, that it wasn't just, you know, it wasn't written as if an older person had written it, it was written as if the child had written it, and it's sort of suited their situation as well. So I do think, in terms of the writing style, it wasn't something that I was sure about at the beginning, but I do think it worked really well for the story, and especially with the sort of characters and themes that they had going on, I definitely think it was a really valuable idea, and one that should be maybe considered with other books as well. A couple of things that maybe I should mention are the ending and also sort of some of the moments towards the end. I did feel like towards the end of the book the pacing got a little bit quicker, so rather than being sort of steady pace, which most of the book was until about halfway through, it was quite fast at the end, and I did feel like the ending felt a tiny bit rushed. The actual end itself, without spoiling too much, kind of gives this seed of hope, and you have this sort of revelation that things may go back to being healthy, things may go back to being the way they were before the fungus came. And while that is a really positive note to end on, I also think it was kind of unexpected. So with the story of the book being so depressive and sort of, you know, focusing on all the bad stuff that's happened and all the desperate situations, to have that sort of glimmer of hope at the end just thrown in there was a little bit strange for me as a reader who'd read the entire book, and then in the last few pages it kind of had that. But I do think to actually look at it from the kids' perspective, that is something that would work really well. So for children, obviously, who are growing up, they have the power to change the world, essentially. You know, they can do so much with it if they put their minds to it. So I think having that there is that sort of glimmer of positivity and potential that kids have to make changes. So I don't think it was necessarily out of place, but I did just find it a little bit odd, and I felt like I should mention it. And then in terms of the pacing itself as well, as I mentioned, it kind of gets quicker after the sort of midway point. For the first half of the book, I did feel like it was quite a slow pace. When I did get to the halfway point, I was like, I'm not sure, you know, what's going to happen in this next sort of half. But then it did rapidly sort of pick up. Their journey got even more serious, and there was a lot more going on. And I feel like that perhaps could have been a little bit more balanced, maybe, just to have sort of the events not as drawn out in the start, but then not as quick at the end, just to make it a little bit more flowing. But overall, everything was great. Like, the readability, as I mentioned before, was great. And in terms of the book itself, I do think that if any kid were to pick this up, they'd have a great time just sort of reading about the kids themselves, the dogs, the situation, and also, you know, having that kind of educational stance on it as well, where there is things to be learned from this book as well as things to be enjoyed in it in terms of the story. It's kind of ironic, really. At the start of the book, Ella actually is borrowing books from one of her neighbours upstairs, and she reads The Lord of the Flies, which he lends to her. And her dad says, oh, you shouldn't read that, you know, it's really sad and it's not a nice book to read. But it does make you think of how closely this book actually relates to the themes in The Lord of the Flies. And it is that kind of parallel that is great. Overall, I do think The Dog Runner is a fantastic book. I really did enjoy reading it, and the themes in there are really hard-hitting and so realistic in terms of what actually realistically could happen at some point in the future. In terms of a score or a rating, I think I'll probably go with a 4 out of 5. There were a couple of issues that I had in terms of the pacing and also sort of the ending, and also a little bit towards sort of the journey itself. I did feel like the book could have had more to it, especially with the fungus. I feel like it was mentioned, but there was never much depth to it. So you know that it happened, you know that it sort of ruined all the plant life, but you never really learned what caused it, where it came from, that kind of thing. So I do think there could have been a little bit more depth to the book. But overall, in terms of its enjoyability and sort of the readability of it, it's absolutely brilliant, and I would highly recommend it to anyone that's thinking about picking up some sort of dystopian future fiction, especially set in somewhere like Australia where you don't really get a lot of stories. Definitely worth picking up if you ever want to. So yeah guys, that was my review of The Dog Runner. I hope you've enjoyed watching it. If you did, let me know in the comments, and also let me know if you have any thoughts on the book yourself, if you have picked it up or if you do pick it up in future. I'd also be really interested in hearing about any of the books that you've read recently. Do you think I should pick up? Because I'm starting to get back into the book blogging, book vlogging sort of group and sort of mentality, so I'm trying to learn about a lot of the books that have come out more recently, because I do feel like I'm quite behind on that. So let me know, and have a great day. See you later guys.